This is Ben Gillespie interviewing Mayor Ceruti, Executive Director of the Walker Art Center at her office in Minneapolis on July 1st, 2020 for the Smithsonian Archives of American Art Pandemic Project. Could you tell me a little bit about how these past few months have been at the Walker and in Minneapolis more generally?
It's been quite a few 4 months. I think that initially we closed the museum on March 13th as we were sort of watching what was happening around the country. And that was really before we had much of an outbreak here in Minnesota yet. I think we've managed so far to keep it somewhat tamped down, the pandemic, in that sense. I mean, we're at, I think now at 1,400 deaths and 30-some thousand cases. So for the state of, a state our size, I think we haven't had the same kind of impact that we've seen in some other large cities around the country. But, the effect is the same when you shut down the museum and you move everyone to working from home. And I think that shift was surprisingly fast and smooth from a technological and logistical standpoint. But I think psychologically, we're only starting to understand the effects of it and the way it's impacted how we think about what we're doing, how intentional we are about who we are working with on what, and all of those things. So I think it's been stressful, but it's also been an opportunity. I mean, I've been thinking a lot. We did a quick shift on our website, and I'll be honest that our website, we were struggling with getting it where we wanted it to be. For a whole lot of reasons from the time I arrived. And once we went to working from home and closing the museum and thinking like, we've got to do more programming, we have to move more of our programming online and be more digitally engaged. And we put together a team who are not necessarily the people that would normally be working on the website to look at sort of what content we wanted to do, what kinds of programs. But also we expanded it to not just think about the website, but to think about social media platforms and other ways we were engaging with people. And so we started working as sort of a team focused on how do we engage with people rather than what's on our website. And I think that also positioned us, I mean, it's positioning us well moving forward, I think, in thinking about just finding different ways of working and getting out of our old modes. And I think when George Floyd was murdered, which, I think obviously that's had an impact across the country and sparked uprisings around the country. For us, it was our neighborhoods, and a lot of our staff live in Seward and in Powderhorn and in areas very near where George Floyd was murdered, but also around Lake Street and where a lot, and in North Minneapolis as well, but especially with our staff, more of them are in South Minneapolis, which it's been a traumatic period, where people have concerns for their safety and certainly for their mental health and emotional well-being. And so, but I think that having been, I think that the COVID situation both, perhaps heightened all of our vulnerabilities in many ways, but it also, I think, positioned us to make quick changes. So, so we were much more prepared to use our social media channels to make statements and to convert our website. In another, week, we converted our website to foreground work from the collection and through our Walker Reader, our magazine, to highlight the work of Black artists and to both also amplify and call for support for some local organizations who are working in the community and led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color who were either, working hard on the recovery and healing efforts, or whose organizations had been seriously impacted and damaged during the uprisings.
So tell me a little bit about how your sense of community has shifted with, it sounds like going online has been a big turn, but also being so rooted in the community and really leaning on and turning to those local organizations.
Well, I think that the Walker has had specific relationships with certain organizations and with different communities. It's not been consistent. Um, I'm not sure that people in Minneapolis think of the Walker as a particularly community-focused organization. So I appreciate that you see it that way, and I like that you see it that way. I think we feel like we have a lot of work to do, and I would say one of the best days over the last month was the weekend after George Floyd was murdered. We had been scheduled to start a project, to break ground on a project with an artist named Jordan Weber, who's based in Des Moines, who works around issues of social justice and engages communities, and he's particularly interested in, well, among other things, in environmental issues and environmental justice. And so he had proposed to work. He had been in residence for the year prior, and had, I think, around 80 meetings with different community organizations, mostly in North Minneapolis, which is a low-income neighborhood, primarily a Black neighborhood. And he worked with an organization called Youth Farm and designed and they have secured an empty lot in North Minneapolis, and he designed a community garden. So which includes some seating and some sculptural elements, but it's also like going to be a working community garden to grow food. And it was supposed to launch that weekend, and because of supply chain issues, they couldn't get the supplies, the plant material and the earth and everything to the site. And there were protests going on everywhere at that point. But we moved forward and did a blessing of the site with an Indigenous artist, filmmaker, curator that the Walker has a relationship with. And she and Jordan had gotten together, and she and another artist, Austin, did a blessing of the site to sort of launch the project that day. And so a group of us went to this empty lot on the north side where, not far away, there had been, massive fires and riots, and there no longer is a grocery store nearby because it got damaged in the uprising. And so to start this project, and it was about, I think there were maybe 30 of us there. And it was teenagers from this group, Youth Farm, who work with youth on community farming, basically, and urban farming. So some of their program staff, and then, Missy and Austin and the artists and a few artists from the neighborhood. And then people just started stopping by who were like walking by or driving by, like, what's going on? And it was just, it was a moment of healing. It was a moment of people coming together to do something constructive in the midst of all of this. And it was one of those moments when you remember why you're in this, right? And why you love working with artists who are sort of thinking about ways to kind of, lay the groundwork for something else. That was probably the best day I had in the last month.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the future of that community garden and how that fits into the Walker as it continues in 2020.
We'll continue to build it, and I think next year will really be hopefully when we'll be able to really it'll take some flight. So it's a multi-year project, and I think ideally we'll be able to do more programming and gather people there in a different way, or bring that back to the Walker in ways to have those conversations. But I think the intent is really that it lives on as a community resource as much as as a work of public art.
So beyond the Weber work, have there been other items from the collection or texts that have been really present to you as poignant during these times?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot. There's a lot in our website right now, and um, it's hard for me to even pull up one or another. I would say we brought forward a piece by Dred Scott that he had written in 2016 that I think a lot about. I have to say, like, not from our collection, but I did read Adam Pendleton's piece, and I guess it was on Art News about 2 weeks ago, about not feeling safe, and I just thought it was a very, very moving statement from an artist who has been working in the art world and clarifying sort of, actually, I shouldn't even say clarifying, just being sort of honest about what that feels like from his perspective. And that's been, I've been thinking about it a lot.
I mean, yeah, there's a great deal of food for thought all over the place. And I know that you are planning to reopen on July 16th as it stands now. Could you tell me a little bit about the planning process for that?
Sure. We've been sort of monitoring, and in April, I realized, I knew that some of the museum directors in New York were talking to each other and about, coordinating and thinking through how this would work. And it seemed quite obvious that I was benefiting from conversations nationally, but that also that this really needed to be a conversation that we had on local or regional levels. So I've been meeting with directors of cultural organizations, both museums and performing arts organizations from around Minnesota, since, I don't know when we started, sometime in April, to think this through. And I think we've been in conversation with the Department of Public Health, with the state public health officials, with independent public health experts, to get sort of independent views of like what really is realistic, and what do we need to be paying attention to, and what do we not need to worry about, like what does science tell us about what we need to be doing. We've also been looking at consumer surveys, and we did our own survey of our members and audiences to find out when would they want to come back, what would make them comfortable, what did they want to see when they came back. And I think for the Walker, I have to confess that it's especially challenging because we're a museum, but we also have a significant performing arts program and a moving image program in addition to our education programming. So we actually have all the challenges of all the different disciplines. So we'll be doing a phased reopening. So on July 16th is our public opening date. We'll open the galleries to the public, but we don't have plans for any moving image or performing arts programming on site through the end of the calendar year. We'll continue to do some of that online, and then we'll sort of see how it goes, whether, when we'll be able to bring people back into a theater space, it's hard to know right now, honestly.
So moving forward, what are some of the lessons from the recent surges of anti-Black racism and COVID-19, and how are those informing your grander vision for the Walker as we step forward into the second half of this year?
Yeah, I have to say, at the risk of sounding like overly Pollyanna-ish or something, I do, as I said at the beginning, I think that the pause that COVID forced upon us, which I admit did not feel like a pause to me. I feel like I've worked more in the last 4 months than I did in the last 10 years, but I think in terms of pausing the actual like production and execution of on-site programming, has given us an opportunity to think about things differently. And I think it will accelerate a lot of, I think that plus the racial equity conversations going on, will accelerate a lot of the change that I came here to make to begin with. You know, like when I got to the Walker in early 2019, one of the things that I had talked to the board about when I arrived, and I said to the staff when I arrived, is that, you know, the Walker had been through a sort of a rough period of leadership transitions, but also the situation with Scaffold and the dismantling of that sculpture and what that did to a relationship with the Indigenous community here. And I thought, well, you know, the Walker really does need to have a different relationship with the community, right? And that's why I was perhaps not as direct as I could have been when I answered your question earlier about how we think about those relationships. But I was being a little oblique when I said they haven't always been consistent or so positive. And I think that to me, that was actually one of the things that was interesting about coming to the Walker, was that because the institution had been through that, they actually understood the need to think about community differently. And that was a conversation I had with the board when, like, before I arrived. And I said, this is why you know, if I didn't feel like they were ready to have those conversations and move that in the right direction, I don't think the job would have been very interesting to me. So I think to be here, this situation between COVID and then sort of post George Floyd murder and this national conversation around race does allow us to sort of really push forward on some things that everybody knew that we needed to be addressing this. Like I don't think there's anybody in the museum field that didn't know that we had issues with race and inclusion and equity. And now it's just being, you know, it's just been forced to the top of the priority list in a way that it never was before. And so I'm welcoming that. I think it is all about how we decide what's a priority and where we put our budget dollars. And this will now be the test for all of us, right? But I think it makes it clear to everyone in a way that maybe it was only clear to some people before.
So I'm wondering, as you start the phased reopening, hopefully, what are you looking forward to most as things come back to some vague semblance of normalcy?
I am really looking forward to seeing people like in the presence of artworks and having conversations about them live. Like that is just like to be in the galleries with some other people at a nice distance. The other, you know, I mentioned that day that I spent with Jordan Weber on the north side, but you know, the other nice thing is that the Walker does have the sculpture garden. So the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden has been an incredible place for moments of respite and being with art and with other people in a really, you know, because you're outdoors, it's just a very comfortable, physically distanced setting that can still be sort of social, and that's been great. But I am looking forward to doing that indoors with other kinds of work, hopefully very soon.
And I remember that wonderful Theaster Gates, was that Black Vessel for a Saint in the Minnesota?
That is, yes.
Garden? Yeah, well, that's tremendous. I guess sort of to move towards wrapping it up, do you have one hope for the Walker, not just for 2020 going forward, because who knows what the next door will unlock, but just one hope moving forward from all this that has been crystallized or informed by these past 4 months that feel like 10 years plus?
I think it's that we will find a different way of working that that makes the process as important and valued as the product, so that how we go about what we're doing and whose voices we're including in it and how we think about evaluating what we're doing includes a lot more people, and it shifts the way we think about what success looks like. I think there's an opportunity to really sort of turn a corner on that and be in a different place. Maybe not next year, but in 3 or 5 years. And that's exciting to me.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. Do you have any closing thoughts besides that?
No, but just let's make this count. You know, it's been a really rough 4 months, and I think it's not going to be easier necessarily. Structural change is going to be really hard work, and it's not going to be a lot of fun. But I think if we keep our eye on the ball, we're going to end up in a better place. And let's make it count.
Well, those words, thank you very much for your time today. And look forward to hearing more of the Walker as always.
Thanks, Ben. I'll look forward to seeing these interviews too. I think it's an important moment, and I'm glad you're documenting it.